Okay, I'm going to, well, wait. All right, for everyone joining us, we're just going to wait a minute or two to let more people roll in, but welcome. Thank you for coming. Feel free to quickly grab a cup of tea, go to the bathroom. We'll get started in like 2 to 3 minutes. Screen share. Is that screen sharing for everyone?
Yep.
Great. All right, we'll just give it another minute and we'll jump into it.
Oh my God, there's Harry. I can't swear now. He'll give me hell.
This is recorded, so anyway.
You just be on your best behavior, my friend.
I'm always on my high behavior, Harry.
All right, it's a couple minutes past 5:30. We might get started, but just so that people will kind of keep rolling in, just so everybody's aware, we had 160 people sign up, so the room will slowly fill in. But we'll just get started because it's been a long day, I'm sure, for everyone, middle of the week. Just checking everyone can hear me okay. I'm guessing that's a yes. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. We're really excited to have this conversation. We know that the dive community has been very concerned nationally about what is happening down in South Australia because we've been getting a lot of questions that we haven't been able to answer. So we're really excited to be able to bring this discussion to you all, to have our amazing guest speakers with us here today, and to really, have the space and time to talk about something that we really deeply care about. So just before we continue, I'd just like to acknowledge the lands that I'm dialing in from today. So I'm personally dialing in from the Darkinjung country on the Central Coast, New South Wales, but I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to all the different lands that we're dialing in from today across the country. If you could post in the chat box like where you are dialing in from, just so we know who's in the room with us today, because we had so much interest in this webinar. It'd be really good to know, where questions are coming from, where interest is coming from around Australia. So please do post who you are, post where you're from in the chat. I just want to acknowledge that Australia has one of the oldest Indigenous cultures in the world, and they've been caring for country, land and sea country, for tens and thousands of years. And there's still a lot we can learn from in conservation for how we look after our coastlines and oceans and marine environments. And also acknowledge a lot of the discussion that we do have is very heavily related to climate change. First Nations people are disproportionately affected by climate change, but are also so critical to the solution. So I just want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that to if there's any First Nations people with us here in the virtual room tonight. With that, so I'm not going to talk too long because I know we want to get to our incredible speakers. My name is Yolanda. I'm the CEO of Divers for Climate. In the room, we have the rest of the Divers for Climate team with us. We've got Sarah, if they can wave, Becky and Kim. You will hear from them all at the kind of towards the end of the webinar. We'll share a bit about what we've been doing. But just some housekeeping, because I'm not sure if everyone's used Zoom before. This is quite a large Zoom room with a lot of people in it. You all have access to use your mics and cameras, but we do ask if you could please keep your microphones on mute until we have question time. If it's not on mute, we have the power to mute you. But just please be mindful when others are speaking. Video cameras, you can keep them on, you can keep them off. It's completely up to you. Just so you know, wait, I haven't clicked record. One moment. I was literally saying 5 minutes ago, I need to remember to click record.
Recording in
Okay, we're now
progress.
recording. Slight pause. Okay, and we're back. We're recording now. Video cameras, we are recording now. So you can have your video camera off, you can have it on. It's completely up to you, just so you know that's what's happening. Please feel free to use the chat box, the Zoom chat, all throughout the webinar session. If you have questions, you can hold on to them till question time and you can ask them, or you can just type them in the chat box as we go, and we'll monitor that and make sure that they're asked. And yet, just generally, please be respectful. This is supposed to be a space full of curiosity, no judgment. We've all got questions. We're all here because we care. And so just to be kind to each other. The agenda, so after this, we'll jump straight into hearing from Stefan from the Great Southern Reef Foundation, Manny from Whaler Dive, and Mark from the Rodney Fox Shark Expeditions to hear about their experiences and what they've been learning down in South Australia. And we'll have quite a bit of time for Q&A and reflections. And then we'll give a bit of a quick summary of our trip down there and what Divers for Climate is doing and how, and kind of open up the floor for what happens next. What can we actually do in terms of action, at whether it's at a government level, whether it's at individual level, how can we help in times of crisis when things are happening in our oceans? And then we'll have some time at the end to wrap up. And if there's any time for more questions, we can do that also. So that's everything from me. Well, no, it's not. That's a lie. Very, very quickly, if you haven't followed Divers for Climate, you're not sure about our journey, I just wanted to give a really quick context. So Divers for Climate exists because we know that divers are on the front lines of climate change. We see change before anyone. If people have not put their head underwater, we're seeing the change first that a lot of people are unaware about. And traditionally it's been really big, visible things like coral bleaching, whereas now we've got things like the algal bloom, even more subtle things like shifts in species. People are seeing changes underwater all around the country because of things like warming ocean temperatures, extreme weather. And yet the dive community is not quite considered a key stakeholder or constituency in climate decision making. They don't come to us to hear what we think about certain climate policies or decisions that are made, which makes no sense because we're really seeing it firsthand and we're really deeply connected. Worldwide, there's about 20 million, rough estimate, divers, free divers, snorkelers in Australia. There's up to 600,000 divers at any one time, but that doesn't even include the millions of snorkelers, free divers, people who enjoy our oceans every day. About 75% of all dive sites and tourism operations are directly impacted by what is happening in our oceans, and we'll hear some of that today about how the algal bloom is affecting certain operations down in South Australia. And from our National Divers Survey, we have found that 91% of divers say they're seeing changes themselves. So it's a very personal experience of climate change around the country. And so Divers for Climate exists to help amplify these voices, to help amplify our concerns and our stories when these events happen, and make sure that they are heard in the right places. So with that, we're here to facilitate a discussion. We're here to help make sure action happens on behalf of the dive community. And so, yeah, with that, while we're all here, I'm not positioned to talk about the algal bloom. So we're going to pass the stage to those who have been on the front lines themselves. They don't need no introduction. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. And they will introduce themselves a little bit. But we do have Stefan Andrews, who's been leading the charge down Great Southern Reef, bringing awareness for the last few years, trying to really give it a name and a brand and image to Australia's, one of the huge part of Australia's coastline. And he's been documenting the algal bloom since I think day one, and it has led him all the way up to meeting the Prime Minister. So he's got a huge journey to share. Then we've got Manny, and I'm sorry, I've put you guys in boxes. We've got the cuttlefish guy and the big shark guy. And Manny, who owns Whaler Dive, who's been leading the tourism around the giant cuttlefish aggregation, which is on my bucket list. I would love to go. It's coming next year. And then we've got Mark Tozer from Rodney Fox Shark Expeditions. And so they're all going to share a bit about their experience with this algal bloom and how it's impacted them, the operations, and the amazing environments that they get to work in. So with that, I'm going to throw it straight over to you, Stefan. You're up first. Did you want to share your screen?
Sure thing. Thanks very much for putting this on, and cheers for everyone that is tuning in tonight. I've got a few slides that I'll go through, and yeah, hopefully this is all working. So, we're almost there. Cool. All right. So, hey guys, my name's Stefan Andrews. I'm a marine scientist and filmmaker and a co-founder of the Great Southern Reef Foundation. I'm here to talk about the algal bloom impacts, but just first give you a brief update of brief summary of what the Great Southern Reef actually is. It's our beautiful kelp forests which line the southern half of our country. We've just got so much to discover down here. A lot of species that are really valuable to the country. These beautiful kelp forests provides home to a whole variety of different creatures, including some that really valuable for our economy. And we've also got all these beautiful diversity of seaweeds, and there's over 1,500 different types. We've also just got a prolific abundance of marine life and seafood that comes out of these waters. A lot of the marine life is found nowhere else in the world, and that's up to 70% of it is endemic to the region. What's really exciting is you start going down into the deeper waters beyond where the kelp forest grows. We've got these beautiful sponge garden ecosystems too. And so the Great Southern Reef doesn't stop at just the kelp forest, but it encompasses these deeper water habitats down to 200 meters as well. And yeah, there's a kaleidoscope of color down there. There's a big misconception that the Great Southern Reef isn't actually very colorful. Once you sort of shine your lights on some of these deeper waters, it's honestly truly spectacular and rivals coral reefs. In the shallow waters, we've got iconic creatures that divers love to interact with, and Manny can talk a bit about this, the cuttlefish aggregation, a bit later on. But for a lot of people in across the Great Southern Reef, because the water's cool and a variety of different reasons, less people get in the water to actually see this for themselves. And what we've seen underwater is some pretty devastating impacts of the algal bloom. What most people are seeing is what's washing up onto the shoreline. This is actually a really rare example how the ocean is telling us it's sick to people that are actually out of the water. But what's happening at the surface on the shorelines is just tip of the iceberg of what's happening underwater. And there are a whole bunch of other species that are just more dense and dying and staying on the bottom. So it's crucial that us divers are down documenting what's going on. This is a pretty gross snapshot of just my home jetty here in Ardrossan, where I live on the Yorke Peninsula in Narungga country. We've had some pretty devastating impacts, and I guess what's been really bizarre for divers is when you start diving after these waters have been impacted by the bloom, you start seeing some pretty weird stuff. Like every time you go in the water, there's something a little bit different. This here is a brittle star. Now, usually they live under rocks, and usually they don't have a hole in the middle of them. This thing was alive, moving around, and seems to be kind of decomposing from the inside out, but was still moving around. It's not just the marine creatures that have been impacted by the bloom, but also the habitats, the sponges, the seaweeds, seagrasses, particularly filter feeding inverts have been impacted the heaviest. But what a really important point here is we just don't really fully understand the true extent of how much of the underwater habitat that all of our creatures that depend upon, how heavily impacted it really is. So how did we get here? Well, in March, surfers started reporting some irritation on their skin and coughing around Wayfinga, which is just at the bottom of the Fleurieu Peninsula there. We can see that lower red image. On this image is showing the chlorophyll A satellite distribution. So it's not showing exactly where the Pyrenea dinoflagella, which is like a microscopic algae-like critter, it's not showing exactly where it is, but it's a proxy for it. So it gives us a bit of an indication of where it is. So this was in mid-March. We started seeing a few creatures wash up on the beach down in the Fleurieu Peninsula. Things started spreading out, and in April, it was the entire north coast of Kangaroo Island that got hit really hard. There was a lot of things washing up on the beaches across there. Because that north coast is really there's not that many places that the shore is accessible, and there's very few divers that are diving there regularly. A lot of the impacts were just reported from beach wash-ups, but even that, it wasn't really getting very much traction in the media that this was really significant, that what was going on, because it was Kangaroo Island, and it wasn't Metro Adelaide coastline. It wasn't where there was a high populous amount of people. So, and people were also hoping that cold conditions were going to set in, some winter storms were going to break things apart, and everything would be fine. That didn't happen. Continued to get worse. We saw more wash-ups at the bottom of York Peninsula, and then Gulf St Vincent obliterated going into the winter. So fast forward to last week, I was with a delegation led by Mayor Amanda Watson from around Adelaide, and these South Australian coastal mayors were presenting to federal leaders around, showing some of the images that you guys have just seen, and demanding action. I'll just quickly rewind here for a second. I think a lot of people are wondering how this all really started. So there's a few factors at play. We had a really warm summer. We had a marine heat wave. So waters were about 2 degrees above average for extended periods. And there was elevated nutrient levels in the waters. And those waters were very calm, and there's a lot of sunshine over that summer. Perfect conditions for an algal bloom to thrive. And so they were the key conditions that kicked things off. And that's kind of how we got here. So why were we there? Well, the whole idea, there's been a bunch of announcements around funding. It took a long time to get that recognition, and part of showing the underwater imagery was a crucial element of that. And there has been significant funding commitments from the state and federal governments as a starting point, which is fantastic. They're taking it seriously, and there's a lot of work that's now being done, put in advanced warning systems for detecting harmful algal blooms, money towards subsidizing industry and fishers that are affected, and so on. But from the scientist perspective, there still are gaps in areas that need and could really benefit from some immediate funding. I want to share with you 2 images, and this is what we also shared with politicians during our visit. So obviously underwater surveys, and I'm talking from divers, but also using BRUVs, baited remote underwater video systems, are really powerful tools for us to assess the impacts of biodiversity, particularly when we have really severe impacts like this. And of course, we can't detect changes unless we've got a good baseline of what the biodiversity is like in the first place. So this here is a nice snapshot of the state that shows where there are long-term monitoring sites across southern Australia, and it does look great that there's a bunch of dots there. But if you look at the sites that we do have a robust baseline, meaning that they are surveyed regularly, it's drastically diminished, and we need robust, regular baseline monitoring, so then we can actually see those and detect those changes. So what the scientists have been calling for is integrated, coordinated monitoring right across the Great Southern Reef, so we can better leverage some of this initial funding that's been set aside towards some of the rapid assessment of biodiversity monitoring, but getting there more regularly and assess the biodiversity right across the Great Southern Reef. So, this is just one of what we're going to expect many more, pretty severe impacts on our Great Southern Reef. So we need to be better prepared in the future. So that's just a real high level summary of what we've been calling for. Now, this is just quickly fast forwarding to the latest. So this is the latest satellite imagery. I live, as I said before, in Ardrossan. It's at the top of the Gulf St. Vincent there, and that's that Gulf that is, you know, very red in the image. I'll just point out that on the right, that September image, there's a lot of grey there. That's just where there's cloud cover, so we don't have accurate satellite imagery within there. But this whole side, like stretch of coast and waters between where I live and Adelaide, that whole red bit, there's been, like, I can't understate how significant the impacts on the marine life is there. There's been very, very widespread mortality, and I'm talking, you know, that there's next to nothing alive at sites when you jump in. The habitat is a bit of a wait and see. And now, if I drive west for about half an hour to the other side of the peninsula, things are actually still looking okay and pretty good. And I've been keeping a close eye on a bunch of the dive sites along there, which is fantastic. But we just don't know what's going to happen and the waters have started warming up, as you'd expect going into the summer. So it's a real big wait and see over there on Spencer Gulf. And it's a very nervous wait. And yeah, Manny can talk about the cuttlefish. They are at the top of that Spencer Gulf, and you can see that red has been expanding, moving up on the western side of Spencer Gulf. This is a recent image from Kangaroo Island. I just jumped in about a couple of days ago on Saturday. And this here is a golden decorator crab. They grow seaweeds on their shells, really cool critters. There wasn't much alive on this dive. Those things that are sticking up around the place are razorfish or razor clam pinner shells. 100% of those had died around the place. There was a lot of things that were dead and dying around the place. But what was weird is this golden decorator crab was one of at least a dozen that I saw there. And just 2 weeks prior, out from Ardrossan, I'd seen dozens of these dead at my local dive site, where there was still a few other things alive. So there's a lot that we just don't understand. There's a lot that we don't know what's going on. But at this stage, because there's actually limited eyes underwater, the more that divers can collect imagery and, you know, be able to record it and report it is you know, super valuable. I'll just quickly wrap up my little section here by just saying that very recently we had awesome mural artist called Pat, or Ink Hunter Artist on Instagram, come to South Australia to come and show his support and do a mural on a couple of our iconic species down here in Marion Bay. Through the Great Southern Reef Foundation, we support these kind of projects that build community and celebrate our marine life, as well as do the advocacy work and education. So there's a lot of people that have been asking and feeling a bit, you know, powerless, like, oh, what can we do? Feeling helpless. If you're a diver, there are things people can do by getting in the water, recording things. There's obviously been a big movement on citizen science towards reporting marine mortalities. But also, you know, there's a space for art when it comes to communicating things too. I'll just zoom back out to finish up and look big picture, the Great Southern Reef here. That section on the, well, when we're speaking of like people feeling helpless and not like, what can we do to stop it? Well, there's been a few, you know, suggestions around interventions, but at this stage, the answers are, well, we don't know how long it's going to last and we don't know how to stop it. But there are things that we can do better. One of those is that long-term monitoring strategy would be a fantastic first start. But also when we zoom out big picture, there are areas of the Great Southern Reef that are impacted by another climate-driven threat, and that is long-spine sea urchins. So that whole red section on the left there, there's a urchin species called the long-spine urchin that's native to New South Wales that's been pushing further down south. And without going into and derailing this algal bloom conversation, I do just want to stress here that there are things that we can do as a country, and our national leaders can step in here. There's a comprehensive plan to tackle the sea ocean crisis, and by increasing the resilience of our Great Southern Reef in areas that have been degraded, we can make it better able to adapt and respond to and be more resilient, essentially, to when we have future climate driven events like harmful algal blooms in the future. So I'll just leave with that, guys. And yeah, I guess I'll just hand over to Manny and we'll do questions a bit later on, right?
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Stefan, so much. If everyone can, there's a react button, you can virtual applause, just in case anyone hasn't used Zoom before. But yeah, pop your questions in the chat, keep them in mind, and we'll do questions at the end. But thank you for sharing all that. That was really amazing. And it must be a lot, it sounds exhausting to be on the front lines like you have been. So really appreciate your time. And I'll pass it to Manny, if you would like to share your experience.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Manny. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening up, and thanks for Stefan for that very comprehensive rundown of everything that's been happening in the state. I guess here, I will share my screen. I've got a little thing for us right here. Let's see. How? Let's see. All right. We'll click on that. Oh, that's not working. All right. So my screen sharing is not working. That's okay. Yeah, I guess just a bit of a rundown as to what I do. I run the dive shop up in Whyalla, viewing the giant Australian cuttlefish aggregation. This year, the numbers were a little bit down compared to previous years. We had a bit of a late start to the season, and while there were cuttlefish washing up in different parts of South Australia, we don't believe that those were the giant Australian cuttlefish. There's many different cuttlefish species in the state. And cuttlefish, they start aggregating to the waters around Point Lowly, generally when the water temperature drops down below 16 degrees. But because this year I guess, for the past, year and a bit, we've had this marine heat wave going on. This dropping of the water delayed the aggregation. So normally when the cuttlefish would start rocking up at the end of April, this year they didn't start rocking up until the end of May. So it was a bit of a concern for us. Thankfully, though, thankfully we had the cuttlefish arriving, which was fantastic. So we were really, really happy to see them. And they seem to have stuck through pretty much until the middle of August. As far as the numbers, they were a bit down. SARD has some reports that I believe are public now that you can go and check out the numbers. I think it was around 70,000 or so cuttlefish arrived and did their thing and mated. And thankfully, the algal bloom has not reached the site. It is about 75 kilometers south of the aggregation site, and the state government has stepped in and intervened, which is great. State government has installed just as of a couple days ago, installed a bubble curtain, which is this technology that's been developed around Canada, where there's a in-water line, a tube, so to speak, with perforations at the top, and they'll pump air through it. For all of us who have, had a regulator free flow underwater and seen bubbles come up, it's very similar to that. It's kind of like a big version of that happening. And by curtaining off a section of the cuttlefish reef, they believe that hopefully they'll be able to protect the eggs which have been laid at the site for the next generation of cuttlefish. So this technology, they won't turn on the bubble curtain until unless the algal bloom reaches close enough to the site. and hopefully they don't have to use it. But it's really good that the government has installed something just in case they do need to use it. I think it's a sort of a couple hundred square meter area that they've covered, and yeah, I think that it's it's a good step in the right direction, trying to be proactive about it rather than doing nothing. There were some other, I guess, options that were investigated, like collecting eggs and storing them in captivity. But I think after reviewing some of the literature and the science and the feasibility around doing something like that, that proved to be a bit too tricky. So this is, I think, probably one of the better options, which is great. That being said, we will keep our eye on the coast. I live over in Coffin Bay, I guess between Coffin Bay and Whyalla, so I'll sort of be back and forth along the southwest to the east coast of the Eyre Peninsula, doing some monitoring and research work. Moving on from cuttlefish, see some comments about some habitat restoration work, which I think is a good segue into what I'll be doing probably for the next 9 months. So aside from the dive shop, I also have a nonprofit organization called Air Lab, the Educating Youth in Restoration Ecology Lab. And for the past few years, we've been investigating native shellfish reef restoration. Over here in Coffin Bay, we have degraded oyster reef beds, which we started looking into over the past few years, and thankfully we've had some good successes with that. We've had some promising results as far as nature being able to recover. We're finding lots of native oysters are able to settle on substrate if you put it down in the right places during the right times of the year. And because of this sort of work, and due to the nature of oysters being filter feeders, shellfish reefs are seemingly a good solution to preventing harmful algal blooms. Now, for, I guess, a bit of context, South Australia used to have over 1,500 kilometers of native oyster reefs and shellfish reefs, and now we have less than 1% of those ecosystems. They were dredged out back in the 1800s. We ate them. We had this massive oyster reef bed, oyster reef network, I should say. It used to be about 50% bigger than the Great Barrier Reef, and we basically ripped it apart to eat them, as well as to build our cities with oyster shells. So because we don't have many of them left, these filter feeding reefs, we are hopefully looking at building them back up. That being said, before we undergo a large scale restoration project, we need to do a lot of research. We need to do a lot of monitoring. We can't just go all willy-nilly, go crazy and start building reefs all over the place. We have to consult with government, with scientific organizations, and make sure that we do our due diligence so that we don't potentially harm the environment. So that being said, our Coffin Bay project is essentially getting upscaled. The state government will be investing about $800,000 into increasing our capacity for building these research reefs across the state. So we'll have 15 sites that we're going to target around South Australia, and we are going to enable communities to essentially start their own projects. These reefs aren't going to necessarily be built by me or my collaborators. They're going to be built by communities who have a lot of the infrastructure already in place. When we talk about South Australia and the industries that can support this type of work, specifically the aquaculture industry and the oyster farming industry. A lot of the material, thankfully, it exists here to rebuild these reefs. We can use Pacific oyster shell to rebuild native oyster reefs if we process it properly. So we're going to be hopefully enabling communities that have their own allotments of oyster shell to start investigating restoration. We'll help them with the research and the monitoring side of things. And once we have gone about it, then we'll hopefully be able to upscale that restoration work in the future. And just for a bit of context, one oyster can filter about 200 liters of water per day. That's a bathtub full of water. And then you multiply that by billions of oysters, then you have nice, healthy, clean water. So as far as building resiliency against harmful algal blooms, this will be something that I believe can be extremely beneficial. It's not the only solution. It's not the end-all be-all solution. We need to really look at climate policy. We need to look at regulating agriculture and the fossil fuel industry and all these other things. It's not just one. There's not just one solution to it. But thankfully, we have all the tools available to start being able to actually do something. We'll be hosting community forums across the state. We're going to be in Kangaroo Island in the beginning of October, followed by Victor Harbor. We'll be heading over to the York Peninsula after that, doing some community forums as well. So we're going to go across the state. I'm going to be spending the next 9 months of my life while I'm not looking at cuttlefish, engaging with communities to start researching restoration possibilities. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as what I've got going on. Thanks for listening. And yeah, I will pass it over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Manny. Virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing all that and all the amazing projects you're involved in. It's good to hear the cuttlefish are okay this year.
Yes, yeah, and hopefully next year too.
And hopefully many years to come.
Fingers crossed.
I'll pop my screen back up and I'll throw it to Mark, who's got some images to share with you. Mark, you're up. Oh, you're just on mute.
There we go. Thank you. I'm not that good with technology sometimes, but thank you for Divers for Climate for putting this on. It's fantastic. And Stefan, your talk, I got a lot out of that. It was really good, and I'm sure everybody here did as well. And Manny, I've been fortunate to work with Manny before, so for a long time. So it's great, Manny, what you're doing, and everybody. It's really, it's touching. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel that there's a bit of hope out there, and not just for the bloom, but hope for lots of ocean stuff that is going on around the world. Is the communities and even everybody that's attending here today. How fantastic is that? It's really good because it's they don't have to, and they're putting their time into it. So I'd like to thank everybody just for doing that, because it's special, and we need the community engagement, and we need all you guys to continue what you're doing. So thank you to everybody just for doing that, and I'll try not to bore you too long with my talk, but I suppose for me, when the bloom started, I was still diving continually, and I personally imagined it was maybe on the beach. It was a bit of a beach problem, or maybe it was out 100 meters or something. I never really dreamt how bad it was. You see dead fish rocking up and all that stuff. But when I started diving and I went out there, and you can see that picture there that probably a few people have seen now, but a lot of those whiting under that prop and stuff, I get to know them just about by name, those fish. I've been diving that wreck for 1,000 times. I just about know every inch of it. And you can't believe when you go down there and you see that, it's heartbreaking, And I talk to a lot of divers, and it's a bad state of affair. Everybody is sad, So getting the community together and what we're doing, what you guys are doing, it really is good, and it's needed. It's needed. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So certainly, once again, Stefan, I think, you know, what you've done, and if we can help you, Stefan, get that out there more, because I think what you're doing is fantastic. So, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation about, you know, certain things, you know, so it's, the more we can do, the more right information we get out there. I mean, even I met with Elizabeth Solich today, and she's got the website YP Marine Watch down at edithburg.com, and you know they're starting to look at, you know, once the algae's there, they're going to take photos down there and watch the changes and document them on the website. So I think that's good. So there's lots of little things everybody's doing, and it's great if we can work together. You know, you see all these groups and everybody working. If we can work together more, you know, I think that's fantastic too, because that's what we need, certainly. From my point of view, if I talk just briefly about sharks, the sharks in Port Lincoln are still there and still okay. The tuna pens have finished harvest now, but they're seeing a lot of we're seeing a lot of white sharks around the pens. So they're there. I've had the boat out of the water for the last 6 weeks, and it's back in. We've done our first trip, and we got some sharks. But interesting enough, we're starting to see a lot of bronze whalers. We see bronze whalers over there, but rarely. We've got some big bronzies. We've got a big female there at the moment, and she's probably 3 meters. We've never seen that before, ever. So what the shift is, we don't know yet, but once we got a research trip coming up with Charlie, so we'll hopefully find out a bit more. See if we can figure out why we're getting a lot more different shark species now heading around the Gulf, you know, instead of white sharks. Is it because of, you know, the lack of food over this Gulf? Perhaps, but we need to get the true data on that before we can let everybody know about what's happening over there. I mean, we take a lot from the ocean, people do, whether it be food, sport, you know, fishing, you know, so we really owe the ocean as a group, as people. I think we really do owe the ocean to support it and try and understand what's happening out there more. So, yeah, I don't have a lot more to say. I mean, the photos speak for themselves. I have the museum in Adelaide, and yeah, that's heading up the cutter. You can see it before and after. So it's just, there's nothing there. It's dead, you know. And even when you touch that particular shipwreck, it just goes to bare metal. So instead of, you know, if you did bang into the wreck while it's, you know, got all the growth on it, it's fine. But you knock into it now and it just comes back to bare metal. That ship's been down since 1984. So, you know, if that's how much growth has been on there, it's got a lot to go. And I dive in Darwin Harbour a hell of a lot every month. And, you know, I always think Darwin's got the worst visibility, and it's, you know, it's a tough place to dive in. But now, you know, I think about South Australia. I think I prefer, right at this point, to dive in Darwin. You can see that's the wheelhouse on a shipwreck, and that's actually, you know, that I'm colourblind, so I don't take the best photos, but you can see that's how it looks. I haven't played with that photo. It's just eerie. It's ghostly down there. Yeah, it's not a happy place for sure, and it's not a place you want to be. I think I've seen the worst. You know, I've been, you know, in the water since 1978. So, you know, snorkeling as a kid down Semaphore Beach. I always remembered thinking, you know, I'd go down and there would be seaweed and there would be crabs and there would be fish, and it was a real happy place. And, you know, I remember as a kid just thinking, I'm going to come here for the rest of my life, you know, and it's going to be beautiful. You know, and, you know, 20 years ago, I went back there and there was nothing there then. You know, the weed had gone, the fish had gone. So there's been lots going on this ocean and planet of ours. And I hoped we would, you know, as a race, we would never do it. But, you know, it's happening. You know, I think about Jacques Cousteau, for instance. He was one of my idols, Sylvia Earle. And I think about Jacques Cousteau talking about in 1950s about the ocean, and we need to protect it, and it's in trouble. This is the 1950s he was talking about it. You know, here we are in 2025, and the oceans, certainly in South Australia, but in the world, are in pain, you know. So I think getting together, you know, doing what we're doing right now, making awareness, you know, it really does give me hope. You know, it gives me hope that what I'm doing with the museum and education and research and just, you know, what we're trying to do and what I've been trying to do my whole life, I do feel warm and fuzzy that, you know, it's giving me hope that you guys are doing great. You know, Stefan and Manny and everybody, you guys are doing amazing. And, you know, I'm proud that you guys are doing it. And I'm proud that you're my friends and, you know, we can discuss all this stuff. So, and divers for, you know, you guys, the Divers for Climate are fantastic. You know, you're going to be talking at the Go Dive show, I see. So that'll be good. I'll come and listen and heckle you probably. But yeah, so that's about my talk, I suppose. White sharks are still good. You know, we've got a lot of different species over there that we need to understand that are normally not there. But in that part of the Gulf, so far, so good. Next year, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we can only go by what we got now. But thank you for listening, and I hope it wasn't too boring.
No, thank you, Mark. You're going to make me cry.
I'm crying.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think the images and the personal story and all the information that you share, I think is really powerful. I mean, same for all three of you. What a like superstar lineup to have present some of this to everyone in the room tonight. Yeah, I just really want to echo Mark's comments about collaborating and just being everyone that's joined us tonight. Like it's 80 people sitting online in an evening. Like I think that's really impressive to come talk about the same thing that we love. With that, we want to make sure we have lots of time for questions. And so we're going to open up the floor for questions. If you feel like speaking up and using your voice, please do just raise your hand there should be a raise hand, and we'll go through and do those first. And then once everyone who's brave to speak out, then we'll go to the chat box. So if you have questions, you want to pop them in the chat, we'll read them out for you and we'll try and get to as many as we can. But yeah, feel free to direct them to particular speakers. Make sure it's respectful. Try and keep questions on topic to things that the speakers spoke about. There's no silly questions. And if somebody's asked a question in the chat that you really like and really want to make sure it gets answered, you can also just like that and we can see which questions are more important or want to be prioritized. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I think, Emmanuel, you are the first one with your hand up. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this webinar, especially I see it's mostly Australia. I'm from the Philippines. I do want to hear about this because I've been hearing the news online about the algal bloom in Australia, mostly southern, right? So I just want to know are there already government action, community actions, progresses? Like what are the marine specialists, marine scientists already doing to combat this upcoming bloom? And like I said, any progresses whatsoever? And then when the divers who surveyed the reefs, did they also get like medical illnesses, like side effects from the bloom?
All right. Thanks, Emmanuel. I'll jump in. So, yeah, I'll answer the last bit first. And someone in the chat has also asked about precautions for diving when you've got the algal bloom conditions. I guess the great thing when you're on scuba is you are self-contained and you're not really interacting too much with the water itself. And so I've found it not to really have it impact me. However, when I did take a journalist out for a dive once, we had to communicate a bit on the surface. I was taking my regulator out of my mouth. I was getting splashed in the face and I had, pretty sore throat and like my sinuses were all kind of like dry afterwards. So if you are diving in it, it's just, I wouldn't recommend it for inexperienced divers and make sure that, you just try and like keep everything sealed up as best as possible. So in terms of what's been done so far, there's been significant investments from both federal and state government. What's been interesting with this is usually federal government doesn't really put money forward towards state waters because they're managed by the state. And so this has sort of been an interesting situation where we've seen federal money coming towards in this case, the Great Southern Reef, which is good. It took quite a lot of pressure actually to get that funding and to get it on the national radar. And then of course it went quickly from national to international news. But that was part of the role of divers in particular in those early days to show just, you know, how significant this is and what's going on. And also the recognition that this is something that could happen in other places around the country. And yeah, when it was recognized, just the significant impact it's had on fishing and tourism, that's when, you know, the money started flowing a little bit. But yeah, it's still early days. The specifics on where the money is going, I probably don't have time to go into right now, but there's been a lot that's gone into, you know, the detection of the toxins in the water and some of the predictive modeling, and then also, you know, the restoration work that Manny's involved with as well. But yeah, there's still plenty of yeah, so as I mentioned before, there's still we still don't really understand how long it's going to stick around, how severe and ongoing the impacts are going to be. So yeah, while the initial funding's been good, there's still I think there's going to be a lot more that's needed to really deal with this issue and best learn from it.
Okay, thank you. I did read about some saying about surveillances, because there's this marine startup I'm working for. They're in Queensland, so they could possibly be part of the network. So when it comes to underwater surveillances.
Great, thank you. If there's no other hands up in the chat room, oh, there is now. Jeff. Then after Jeff, we'll go to the ones in the chat.
Yeah, g'day, Stefan, Manny, Mark, etc. Great work, guys. Just I guess a question. We've been sort of trying to monitor our local dive site, Port Augusta here, for those that aren't aware, an unusual spot. I guess a couple of questions. You know, if we're trying to monitor our local site and take photos, etc., is there somewhere in specific that we can put them, or is it iNaturalist? And part two is, if we identify suddenly that we do get the bloom here or an effect that looks like the bloom, what should we do?
So Jeff, I think there's there's no designated space to be uploading underwater imagery of impact. There's the marine mortalities page, which you can upload if there's anything dead there. I think what people will be really interested in up in Port Augusta there, if you guys are in the water regularly, is just seeing anything out of the ordinary. Like there seems to be a lot of testing going on around, you know, is the Karenia algae in the water. But I think what's really interesting is what are some of the early species that are getting hit, and it's those filter feeding invertebrates, because there's just so much water going through them. So there are any species in particular that are, you know, starting to die off, and that I think is really valuable knowledge. So then we can also use divers to then be looking out for certain species in the future, because there might be species that are indicators or predictors that are more vulnerable to help us assess, you know, if things are on its way. So yeah, anything unusual. One thing that I noticed here in Ardrossan before the actual bloom impact started coming up, we started seeing random species that you wouldn't usually see in these shallow seagrass habitat waters, like nanny guy. You know, you see them in usually about 20 meters of water under rocky reef ledges. And there was one just sitting there underneath the Ardrossan jetty, and it's fully out of place. So anything that's unusual like that, you can report on RedMap, which is traditionally used for tracking, you know, species out of their distributional range. But if it's just something a bit of an unusual observation, that gets good traction. There's scientists monitoring that one. And also, yeah, feel free to let me know straight away. It's always interesting to see what might be happening down there, or up there rather.
So easy. I guess I was just looking at it from the scientific perspective of if, we, do we look at the same spot each time, or, and like, I guess keep a record of it somehow. But yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, and I think that raises a good point too, just more broadly, like the value of divers is not just, showing the impacts, but also what we've seen is when these areas have just completely, changed in a matter of days or weeks, it's really valuable to have the before imagery, because that helps non-divers especially know that, be able to recognize the massive changes that have been observed. And I mean, I even posted some video of Kingscote Jetty just over the weekend, and people were like, oh, no, it's always looked like that. I've been diving there like 20 years ago, looked like that. And it's like, well, actually, no, like have a look at this other footage or these other images. And that even for divers being able to capture imagery of where it's looking healthy, that's, super valuable, particularly now on the western side of the York Peninsula. So Port Hughes especially, great spot for divers, and we hope that that's going to hold up all right, and people have been diving there, it's looking okay. But yeah, I think it's be really valuable to just keep getting divers in there and getting imagery.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Jeff, and thanks, Stefan. We're going to go to the questions in the chat. So Becky's been monitoring. I know, Stefan, you've answered a bunch already, and there's a few that have been answered by the community, which is awesome to see. But I'm going to throw it to Becky, who's going to ask some of the questions that have been put in the chat box.
Hi, everyone. I've got a message here from Julie Jones asking, are the Reef Life Survey Foundation involved for the extended surveys that are needed?
Thanks. So Reef Life Survey do incredible work to have standardized methodology to do underwater surveys across reefs. And there is the opportunity for people to get trained up as Reef Life Survey divers in temperate waters across the Great Southern Reef. At the moment, though, the trainers are essentially at capacity with other, bloom-related assessments and everything else going on. So there's nothing in the near futures for divers to be able to sign up to get Reef Life Survey training in South Australia, but hopefully that's going to change soon. And I'm sure that both Great Southern Reef Foundation and Divers for the Climate will be able to promote that if it does become available sometime soon.
I've also got a comment from Tony Roberts, who says, I hope there is good communication on the reef restoration between Vic and SA, as there seems to be a lot going on here. It's not really a question, but I thought it was still relevant. Communication between states and the spread.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to take that one. The good communication is what? Yeah, I'm not too sure. Sorry.
I think from from a restoration practice point of view, just in our case, we communicate as far as best practices. We communicate with organizations like Ozfish, who have been doing some restoration work in other states, like I think New South Wales, Queensland. I'm not too sure about their projects in Victoria as it pertains to shellfish reef restoration, about how best to go about things, because a lot of practices around restoration are experimental. And so looking at other projects and communicating with other people who have gone through that process a bit has been incredibly useful. So I think in my case, we're definitely communicating with other organizations that conduct similar activities. And I think as far as from a governmental perspective, state government will definitely be chatting with other state governments about how to, I guess, how we're dealing with it and how just in case the algal bloom does reach, other states, they're onto it already. So.
I think Kim, did you have a question specifically as well?
Yeah, if I'm allowed to jump in and ask a question, for Mark and Manny specifically, I'm curious how you guys have gone trying to talk to your customers or to potential customers about this. Has it been difficult trying to answer their questions or, I guess, address their concerns?
Yeah, we get most of it, a lot of our people that come out on the boat are from overseas, America, Europe, and sometimes they're booking 1 and 2 years in advance. But yeah, certainly they are definitely now on a daily basis asking us, are there sharks? Have they been killed? Yeah, I mean, we just tell them what we know. We're an open book, so we tell them. But the sharks, the truth of it is the sharks are still there. So, and we're out. So, but yes, we're getting DARS on a daily basis now. People are not cancelling trips, but they're very nervous, I must say. Yeah, because you're coming from America, for instance, to come out with us. You're spending $15,000, by the time you come, and then you do the trip, and then your accommodation, and so it's an expensive thing. So, yeah, definitely, it is definitely a talking point on a daily basis for our team. But so far nobody's cancelling, and we're just telling the truth as we see it. Yeah, I mean, we tell them because we like to send people once they come out with us, we like to send them down to Rapid Bay to dive with the leafies. So we send them down to Peter, and so we like to do that. But now we can't. We don't. They say, well, what else can we do? We used to send them down to dive with leafy sea dragons. Now we can't. We're more go to the wineries and go to Brossa or something. So that sort of thing has changed for us definitely. Where and also we'd send them to the local dive shops. And just say, well, go diving on the local wrecks. So, because, they're not here for 4 days with us. They're normally coming for 10 days or something. So it's a little bit harder for us to fill up their time, and give them ideas of diving for sure. So, I work with Mike Ball, Craig really well. So, now I'm thinking, well, we might be able to do trips together sort of thing to keep people busy.
Yep. And I definitely noticed a very, similar thing. We get asked all the time about our local sites being impacted. This is the first year that I've run the dive shop in Whyalla. And so compared to previous years, the only thing I've had to look at are the reports and the numbers. I will say that our numbers have been down as far as people, doing snorkel tours and dive tours. Numbers were down a bit from last year. I think maybe 10-15% down. That being said, when people were calling up and asking, we didn't really have maybe a handful of people cancel. Even though, we told them that, that the habitat is fine and the cuttlefish were fine. And just like Mark was saying, we have a lot of people who are coming from international locations. They're going to come do a big South Australian dive expedition. They're going to come see the sharks and the leafies and the cuttlefish. And so only had a few people who canceled their trip essentially because they weren't going to be able to check off leafies from their bucket list. I think that was also at a time when the Rapid Bay jetty was shut down. I think part of it's back open now. It's completely closed still. Yeah. So unfortunately, we've had a few, but it hasn't been too detrimental to our business. That being said, just circling back, I did see a question in the chat a little while ago. Some of the funding that state government is putting into this as a response is into small business grants, essentially. So a lot of tourism businesses or aquaculture businesses that have been impacted are eligible for certain amounts of grant funding. And it's just, Band-Aid on a bullet wound for the meantime, just to, keep families afloat. There'll have to be, businesses are going to have to adapt one way or another, whether they like it or not, to this. But at least just to, smooth things over for the meantime, the government has been pretty quick actually to give out funding to local businesses. I know there was some businesses around the Coorong where they applied, and within like 4 days they got like 10 grand in funding. So there is a bit happening in that space. But as far as I think we're going, we're doing okay.
Great, thanks, Manny. And that's a really good segue. I know we've got a few more questions, and we'll have some time at the end for questions, but I thought we'd quickly jump into kind of what's next, and kind of what we're doing. You know, some of the actions have already been brought up, like the rapid bay jetting, what adaptation looks like if this is coming in the future, what do we do as an industry and as a community of people that care about the ocean? So we're just going to quickly divert for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll hopefully have questions, some time at the end to wrap up those last few questions that haven't been answered yet. So thank you all for participating. I'm going to share the screen back, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Sarah. Sarah and Becky led a lot of divers requirements engagement work down in South Australia, and they're just going to share a bit about why we went down there, what we did, and what we're doing with all this, everything we're learning information now, and how you and the dive community can kind of help moving forward, whether it's for the algal bloom now or whether it's for the future events that may happen. So Sarah, the floor is yours.
Oh, I don't know how to work my audio either. Yeah, so thank you guys. So a lot of this, or some of this has been covered already, but essentially just a quick rundown of what led into the trip and what kind of things we got into down there. So for the past few months, we've been engaging with about 7 different local dive operators and the wider dive community around South Australia to try and better understand how the algal bloom situation, as well as the associated media, is affecting dive operations, how local dive sites are being impacted, and essentially to give us an insight into how the dive industry can best be supported during marine crises like this at such an unprecedented scale. So from these early conversations, it was quite clear that the impacts were pretty varied, as mentioned. Certainly wasn't a one-size-fits-all type situation. Each dive center kind of faced their own unique setbacks, with 1 or 2 at the beginning remaining, largely unaffected by the bloom, whereas others were, completely unable to operate, like Kangaroo Island. And overall, we were, in the middle of the majority's off-season, so it was quite hard to know the true impacts of the bloom yet on numbers, as we just mentioned. In one of my early conversations a few months ago with Manny, actually, I asked what would be most helpful for us, as an organization to do right now for the dive community down in SA. And what he told me was, come down, see it for yourself, have these conversations in person and hear from the local community, on the ground, have a presence down there. So that's what we did. We ended up spending a week down in Adelaide, having these conversations in person with operators. We met with a range of decision makers and were able to take the insights that we learned from the industry into these meetings with the politicians to amplify the voices of the local dive community. We were also able to get our heads underwater and go for a dive out at Port Noarlunga and witness these impacts for ourselves firsthand. As you can imagine, the dive was pretty confronting. I think there was some images there. But we were able to, as Stefan mentioned, we were able to send off the photos and videos that we got to local scientists to help assist in with the monitoring of these sites, as well as just generally raise awareness on this issue with the nationwide dive community through social media and such. So from all of this research, Divers for Climate prepared a submission to the Senate inquiry into the algal bloom, drawing on what we learned from dive operators, tourism representatives, and the community during our consultations. This submission kind of combined those lived experiences with our team's expertise to put forward clear recommendations for resilience and for the safeguarding of South Australia's marine tourism industry, and of course, its iconic marine environment. Kim will delve a bit deeper into this shortly, excuse me. But for now, I'll hand over to Becky to finish up on our trip.
Hi again, guys. Yeah, so I feel like I really just wanted to talk about the feeling that I had experienced whilst watching the algal bloom unfold online, seeing the media, seeing the imagery being shared, and kind of feeling that feeling of wanting to help and wanting to stand in solidarity with the divers and the community in South Australia, and the difference in the feeling of actually being there. We were there, and it was a very quick week because we were very busy and we were running around, obviously meeting politicians and stakeholders, and then also the dive industry and the dive community. And the difference between feeling kind of speaking to politicians and then speaking to the dive industry and seeing the reactions to people that were actually underwater and, you know, living these changes, seeing the magic, feeling that experience. I was incredibly moved by how united the dive industry was, and also the dive community down there. You know, everybody's wanting to help and everybody's wanting to get involved. So yeah, for me, just being a part of this and connecting the dive industry and the community to the politicians felt like a very powerful action. It was very motivating for me. I'd been feeling very lost and kind of unsure of how to help. And I think that that was, yeah, a big thing for me, is that my voice and storytelling and other people's voices and connecting that could make a really big difference. So whilst we were down there, the key findings that we kind of uncovered was that the economic impacts on the dive industry were severe but different. Obviously, every dive business has a different dive model. Tourism industry has different models as well. So it wasn't a blanket fits all situation, but overall, everybody was feeling some type of impact in terms of like questions being asked and the economic impact as well. Short-term support mechanisms were kind of unclear, which means that kind of the frameworks were a bit uncertain. The funding was available, but people weren't sure how to access it necessarily, and maybe it was a bit of a complicated process. And overall, we definitely felt that the mental health and well-being of the dive operators and the wider dive community was significantly affected. And we had a lot of outreach from the dive community, which is why we set this up to kind of get everybody together and be able to share stories and experiences. So really amazing. Big thanks to the speakers, and thank you to everybody that's here, because this is for you. And Kim, I'm going to hand over to you now, and she's talking about how we're going to continue to ensure that the voices of South Australia are heard, and how this work can continue with everybody.
Thank you, Becky. Hi, everyone. My name's Kim, and like Becky said, I'll just take a few minutes to share some steps that Divers for Climate have already taken off the back of that work that happened in South Australia. So based on those key findings that Becky just talked through, we've developed some recommendations for future actions for government, industry, and for community. Firstly, it is very clear to us that there needs to be government investment in helping dive centres to understand and to adapt to climate risks that are threatening their livelihoods, both in the short term for this specific algal bloom, but also long term for whatever risks climate change might present over the coming decades anywhere in the country. Investment should be made to support adaptation measures that come directly from the community itself. So things like opening a new dive site at inland quarries so there's still options for recreation and training, or opening new sites, restoring sites like the Rapid Bay Jetty to help divers access unaffected parts of the coast. It's also important that the dive and tourism industries themselves adapt by proactively integrating climate change into long-term planning processes and strategies at industry level, but also into the day-to-day operations of dive shops to make sure that these businesses can remain viable through climate events like this algal bloom. It's also so important that dive professionals as individuals are upskilled in industry-specific climate information and tools, and that collectively we as dive professionals advocate to our certification agencies, our tourism associations and other sort of professional bodies to encourage them to provide more guidance for us and support us when we're dealing with events like this. There are also a number of things that the dive community, so everyone on this call, can do to support our friends in South Australia, but I will leave that for Yolanda to talk through in just a minute. So the first thing that Divers for Climate did with all of this information that we gathered is to prepare a submission for the Senate inquiry into the algal bloom. And I appreciate that this gets a little bit dry, so bear with me for a couple of minutes. A Senate inquiry is one of the ways that the federal government sort of holds itself accountable and looks at how effectively they're doing business and formulating policy. And they do that by launching investigations into specific issues. And they've opened an inquiry onto the algal bloom in South Australia that's investigating, honestly, so many aspects of the issue, including things like the causes of the bloom, the economic and the social impacts, and the adequacy of the support and the coordination that's been offered by the federal government and so on. These inquiries are really, really powerful tools because they give organisations and individuals in the community the opportunity to directly participate in our federal policy making processes and have our views placed on the public record. There's two main steps in this Senate inquiry. So the first is the process of the Senate committee gathering evidence. And that is done partly through written submissions, which allows individuals and organisations to share information and evidence that they think the Senate should be considering in their investigation. So we wrote a submission that included 7 key findings and 14 policy recommendations. I'm not going to go through all those in detail, but they're pretty much an expansion on those key outcomes that Becky and I just went through. The full submission is available through the QR code on your screen and on the inquiry's website if you're interested in reading that in more detail. Like I said, I appreciate that these submissions can be really dense to read through, but in this one, we've tried to make it as accessible as possible, and particularly we've tried to use as many direct quotes from the South Australian dive community as possible. So I do encourage you all to have a flick through it and just learn a bit more about their experiences. The next step in this evidence gathering process is to hold public hearings. And this is where the Senate committee selects some of the organisations or individuals that gave written submissions to be public witnesses and to answer additional questions in a public forum. So there's 4 public hearings on the algal bloom that have been called. All of them are in South Australia later this month. They haven't announced yet, as far as I know, who is being called as witnesses in these hearings, but we're really keeping our fingers crossed that Divers for Climate or the Great Southern Reef Foundation are invited to speak at these. These hearings are held in public and anyone is welcome to come and listen. So we really encourage the community in South Australia to join in on those if you can. And for those of us not in South Australia, the audio is also broadcast online if you want to listen in. After the public hearings, the Senate committee will write a report and present its findings and recommendations to the government based on all of that evidence that they've gathered. And the government will then draw on that report to inform their future policy and legislative decisions. So it's a really important document that comes out of this process. The reporting date for this inquiry is the 28th of October this year. And I really hope that in that report, we'll see some recognition of the challenges that divers and the dive industry are facing, along with some recommendations to the Senate that are drawn from what the dive community in South Australia have suggested. So we'll be monitoring this process and its outcomes quite closely over the next few months. And we'll do our best to share the most important parts of that with you all via email or socials as things progress, particularly on the details of those public hearings and the contents of that final report. So stay tuned for that. The second way that we've used these findings and recommendations is in a case study report called Below the Surface, which we are very pleased to be sharing for the first time today. You can find that using the QR code on your screen, and we'll also email it out after the webinar. This report it's a case study of the algal bloom, and it documents the ecological and economic and social impacts that it's had on the dive community specifically. And we've designed this report very broadly to be used by anyone, including everyone on this call. So policymakers, researchers, industry stakeholders, and the broader dive community to help understand the lived experience of the dive community in South Australia. We really wanted to highlight the role of divers and the dive industry as trusted messengers of how climate change is occurring in the ocean, and also to detail some of those key findings and recommendations more to help inform climate policy and help build climate resilience, both in South Australia and more broadly across the country. So I really encourage you all to read it, to learn more from the dive community in South Australia, to maybe use it as an advocacy tool if you're speaking to your local MP or councillor or a tourism authority about climate change, maybe to start thinking about how your dive business can prepare for and adapt to our changing climate, maybe to support the development of strategies or plans at the industry level to account for the impacts of climate change on tourism, or to inform any research that you might be doing related to the algal bloom. And as always, if there is anything in that report or in the Senate inquiry submission that you'd like some more info on, or if you just want to have a chat about it, always feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to talk through this kind of policy work in more detail. But for now, I will hand back to Yolanda, I think, who will take us through what's happening next and some actions that we can all take together. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim and Becky and Sarah, for sharing all that. It has been a a phenomenal effort. If anyone's been in startup NGO land, it's always hectic. So the team has pulled together a lot in a very short amount of time, and it's been, yeah. So thank you all for sharing that. I just wanted to wrap up with some things the community can take away, and then maybe we'll leave 5 minutes for any extra questions. And also, if Manny, Mark, and Stefan want to share, I know you've mentioned some actions in your talks before, but if you wanted to reiterate them at the end. So the actions for the community that we kind of came up with, because Divers for Climate, we have a dual role. Like, one is we keep the pulse on making sure, we mitigate climate change, making sure we can make sure Australia has ambitious climate policies, that huge mitigation piece. But the other piece is also adaptation and resilience, noting that we're not sure, when the next algal bloom is going to happen, for example, but we do know we do need to be prepared for events like this. So how do we support the dive community industry in those kind of times of crisis? So community actions, plan a visit to South Australia. I think that was a universal that came out of a lot of the talks, that a lot of our experience at Divers for Climate, we started on the Great Barrier Reef. And so it's been very interesting to draw similarities to coral bleaching events, for example. And when those events do happen, there is fear that people will stop visiting. And we know that, a place like the Great Barrier Reef is huge. So impacts are varied, very similar to South Australia, right? Impacts are varied. It should not stop you from going down and visiting and supporting the businesses, going to have a look for yourselves underwater. As Manny and Mark said, the sharks are still there, the cuttlefish are still there. Keep in touch with the ocean and these spaces that bring us all together. So go and visit. The second thing is write to your federal MPs. A lot of the advocacy work has been happening down in South Australia, but everyone that's doing that work right now could use as much help as they can get. So if you can print a copy of our report, you can take it in, contact your federal MP and go into a meeting with them and just tell them that you're concerned about what's happening. They might not even know. They don't always have all the information that they need. If that's something you want to do and not sure how, we can help set up those meetings. We see ourselves as facilitators. So sometimes if an MP is a bit hesitant to meet with an individual, if you'd like an organization to back you, if you'd like a group to go with you, we'd be really happy to help make that happen, because that's part of what we're all about. So please do consider that, or even if you just want to write an email, if you don't want to actually go meet them, give them a phone call. I'm terrified of phone calls, but some people like them. We're still trying to keep our pulse on national climate action, so you can sign our national statement. It's on our website. We're just trying to get the numbers to say that divers want more ambitious action, and we've been taking that to politicians ourselves. We'll also be taking that hopefully down to Canberra very soon, so please do sign that to make sure that we still have that climate action piece there. Share your story. We had a beautiful story shared today, and I know there's people who have stories who are in the audience that are equally powerful. Like, what we've learned about the dive community is the stories that we have are incredible. We know all the magic that exists underwater, but we're also seeing a lot of change, and those personal stories are what move people on climate. Those personal stories are what move people on any environmental action. We need the evidence, we need the science, but in the end, that kind of people relate to people. And so the more people that are sharing their own stories of things they deeply are connected to, I think the more we can create the future that we really want to see. So please do share those. You can share on social media. You can tag us. If you have a different kind of story, you want to write an article, share photos, we're here to help facilitate those things getting out into the world. So please do reach out. And then number 5, support local dive community. So Stefan mentioned earlier in, I think, the chat, Rapid Bay Jetty, there's a petition at the moment led by local divers to reopen that for recreation. So you can sign the petition right there. And, supporting the local dive community. And for example, Manny, Mark, and Stefan, the initiatives that they're all running, please do go follow them and support the work. I'm sure you can keep an ear out for things that they need help amplifying around the country, and just support as much of the work that's already being done as you can. I think is really powerful. The last thing that I'll share before opening up the floor again, or for any comments from the speakers, is one of the key findings was a lot of anxiety, a lot of climate grief, a lot of eco-anxiety about what's happening. And I know this is, it's amplified now because of the algal bloom, but I know divers feel it everywhere around the country. This year we had the Great Barrier Reef bleach, Ningaloo Reef bleach, not to say all the bad things, but there was a lot to deal with if you are so connected to what's underwater. And so we've been lucky enough, we're partnered with Psychology for a Safe Climate. They're an organization full of trained psychologists who particularly work with climate anxiety. And they've offered 3 sessions for us for anyone following this call who'd like to go and talk to them. So the link to the Humanitics, the event page is there. It's either free or by small donation, but you basically rock up. They're small group sessions. and they're facilitated by professional psychologists, and they can walk you through anything that anyone is feeling. So there is an option there if that is something that you need. Otherwise, that is everything from me. I don't know if Manny, Mark, or Stefan, you guys have some final calls to action you'd like to reiterate now, or otherwise, I can't see the chat on my screen. If there's other questions from the community. We're on time. That's so good.
I'll just jump in and say congrats, guys, for putting in the Senate inquiry submission. Sorry, Mark, I might have butted in. The public hearings are next week, and yeah, we'll be representing Great Southern Reef Foundation at the Seacliff one on the 9th of September, and that's going to be something. It is a public hearing, so anyone that is based in Adelaide or the rural ones across South Australia, we do encourage you to come. If we get more people there, it shows that people care, and it makes those public hearings even more powerful. So that's one thing that I can encourage you guys to attend. Mark.
I agree. Yeah, I agree, Stefan. You get everyone to attend, and absolutely. I think it's so important too. Let's show some. I see a lot of dead fish every day. Let's also show some really nice pictures too of the ocean, just for our own, everyone's mental health. So if we do go diving in it and we do see some really cool, healthy stuff, let's show it. Because I think that's important as well. So that's probably my last word. And thank everybody for participating again. It was fantastic. I actually got a lot out of it, so I'm happy.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks to Divers for Climate for putting this on. Really appreciate all of your guys' time and input, and for coming down to hang out with us for a week. It was good fun. And thanks to everyone here who's listening in and who's taking time out of their own day to hear about this. So.
Well, thank you all so much for joining. Thanks to speakers. Thanks to everyone in the audience. I think we all need to go on a group dive in South Australia at some point. I think that's definitely on the table. We really appreciate it. And please do keep in touch with any or all of us. And we can keep this conversation going and hopefully see really positive outcomes from decision makers, from community and our oceans. So thank you all. Have a lovely Wednesday evening.
Cheers. Thanks.
Recording stopped.